And this is episode 9 of the Lifestylepreneur podcast. And my guest today is Rob Walch, the VP of Libsyn, where he talks about how to market and monetize your podcast. Welcome to the Lifestyle Entrepreneur Podcast. I'm your host, Kris Gilbertson, and I'm an author, speaker, and a coach to teaching you how to launch your own successful podcast. And the reason I designed this show is to bring you the top lifestyle entrepreneur experts from all over the world for them to share their key strategies that they've used to launch their own businesses and allow them to live life on their own terms. So tune in every Friday for new episodes and come on over and join the Lifestyle Entrepreneur community at www.lifestyleacademy.com. There you're going to receive VIP training from specific guests from the podcast, along with being able to watch all of the interviews. And I'll also be making it really easy for you to implement these strategies that you're hearing by sending you what I like to call the Lifestyle Cliff Notes on the best lessons learned on the podcast. So let's get started. All right, so before we get started with the show, I just want to thank everyone who is subscribing and leaving awesome reviews in iTunes. I'm so excited that people are enjoying these interviews. And I'm excited to announce First Fridays. So what I'm going to be doing the first Friday of every month, we're going to have a raffle for those of you that have subscribed to the podcast and then also left a review. And it'll be a raffle for $25 gift cards from iTunes, Amazon, eBay, all over the place. So all you simply need to do is just subscribe to the podcast in iTunes and then leave us a review, and your name will go in a hat, and we'll announce that the first Friday of every month. And right now I want to give a shout out for one of our listeners from Mona98. She said, "Wow, I'm so inspired. I freaking love this podcast. I already feel like I've met other women who are revolutionizing the business playing field. This is an amazing community to be a part of. Don't hesitate to press play. You won't regret it." So Mona, thank you so much. So glad that you're a listener and enjoying the podcast. So again, just make sure to subscribe, leave us a review, and we'll put you in for the raffle on the first Friday of the month. And now let's get to the program. Well, welcome back, everyone. I am so excited for my guest today. We're going to have an absolute blast. Definitely, if you're a media entrepreneur or someone who wants to get their message out there in a bigger way, this show is going to be for you. So I'm so excited. My guest today is Rob Walch, and he is the VP over at Libsyn, which is the premier podcast hosting platform in the world. They literally host over 80% of the top 100 comedian podcasts, including Adam Carolla, Joe Rogan, all the amazing artists that are out there that are just paving the way of podcasting. And they've been the pioneer in the industry since it started back in 2004. And so I'm really excited to bring Rob on board today to really pick his brain on what's going on in the trends, because I know a lot of people ask me questions all the time about what's going on with podcasting, where it's going. And I wanted to give you the insider knowledge of how things are going to be blowing up with podcasting as they already have. So welcome, Rob. How are you doing today?
Good. Thanks, Kris, for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for coming here. So what I'd love to get started with is just your background and your story and how you got started with podcasting.
I've been podcasting a long time, so over 8 years. I started back in 2004. So I started back when this was just starting out. And quick background is I was one of those people that called into radio shows all the time, was one of those really annoying people that was a regular call. So I always wanted to be on the radio. Heard about this thing called podcasting in October of 2004 and said, I need to do a show. And my initial show that I did was called Podcast 411. And my thought was, hey, I'll just do a show about interviewing other podcasters. And at the time, it was the right place, right time, and the show just took off. And I had some really great guests early on, some big celebrities. People Ronald Moore, who is a producer of Battlestar Galactica. I was able to get him on. Walter Mossberg, Quincy Jones came on the show. Larry Kudlow came on the show. Adam Carolla, Leo Laporte, all the big names in podcasting came on in the early days. And it just was a fun show, and it got me into podcasting. And I started out consulting from that. First client was Senator John Edwards. First client I turned down, Senator Obama. So see how that worked out for me.
Well, that is fantastic. So what got you into it, though? What was kind of the tipping force of why podcasting?
I just like the democratization of it, that you could do a show and not be beholden to anyone's rules or regulations. You can do a show when you wanted. The show could be as long as you wanted. Didn't have to have commercial breaks. Didn't have to worry about FCC regulations. That said, my shows have always been G-rated, but a lot of people I've interviewed over time definitely have not been G-rated. You know, Joe Rogan's show would not be able to be aired on any radio station in America. It makes Howard Stern seem, lame. Or tame, I guess. Either way. But yeah, no, I think what really got me, and it was just the ability to do what I wanted to do, how I wanted to do it, with no set rules.
I love it. That's fantastic. So I know you talk a lot about, for the early adopters in the podcasting world, were techs, more tech savvy individuals. But going forward, it's really kind of morphed into the comedy space. And you talk about a lot about education podcasts now, or comedy and education are two of the biggest areas. And then sports. So can you talk a little bit more about the trends that you see in those areas?
Yeah, when I first came on board Libsyn, I started with Libsyn in 2007, and I looked, where are our shows, how many downloads are we getting where? And when I looked at the top 100 podcasts, we looked at our downloads, it was about 7% was comedy. Today, that number is closer to 47% is comedy. And comedy and education make up over 69, 70% of our top podcasts in the top 100. So it's really moved from where tech was a stronger segment, like 13% of the top podcasts. Now it's down to like 2% of the top 100 on board. It's really moved from this uber geek tech. And I mean, my show, Podcast 411, is that uber geek techie show as you get. It's like inside a niche. But now you got shows like Mark Maron, who on this Friday, he has a TV show premiering on IFC where his lead character is a podcaster. So, I mean, it's moved so far to the mainstream, and comedy has really taken over, and you can see that when you go into iTunes, a lot of the top podcasts. Aisha Tyler's got a great podcast. As I mentioned, Mark. You mentioned Adam Carolla before, Joe Rogan. The Nerdist, Chris Hardwick just got a TV show as well. Jim Jeffries, who has a podcast talking, expletive with Jim Jeffries and Eddie Ift. He had a show, or has a show, on FX. So what you're actually seeing is a lot of these podcasters are moving into television, and podcasting is helping segue from one medium into another.
Yeah, it's so amazing. I mean, I love that story with Joe and what he's done with his podcast, and really for the whole, comedy arena, because he talks about how he went from small clubs to now they're selling out huge Comedy Central theaters, and they're like booking all their shows because of their podcast. It's just amazing how people are able to connect that way. So I'd love for you kind of to talk about why that is, because I think today I'm always on my podcast soapbox talking about how people want content when they want, where they want, and how they want. And they, the true king of currency for marketing today is connection. And I'd love for you to talk about that with the podcast and why this shift has happened.
I think the shift happened and two key things came together. And they're coming together at the same time. One was the comedy podcast, and comedians realized, hey, this is a way for me to get my content out, not only to get it out, but the reason why most of the comedy podcasts host with us, I've heard from many of them, is they get to see the geographic stats of where their downloads are. So they can take that information and say, hey, I'm getting a lot of downloads in St. Louis, but not so much in Kansas City. I'll go to St. Louis, not Kansas City. So you have the comedian podcasters coming in, and everyone loves comedy. Everyone loves to laugh. I mean, if you talk to someone who doesn't like to laugh and they tell you don't like to laugh, that's a really depressing person. Yeah. But I mean, the majority of people like to laugh. And then on the other thing that's come in is the mobile side of it. Last month, 53.12% of our downloads went directly to mobile devices.
Wow.
And that was up from 51.37 in March. So we are at a point now where podcasts, most of them, people just open up their smartphone, and tap on an app and listen. It's not the difficult thing it was in 2004. 2004, if you wanted to subscribe to a podcast, you had to find a very unique app called iPod or X, and you had to find this app that was third party, get it on your computer, get the podcast to download, remember to sync your iPod to the computer in the morning before you left for work. And there was all these steps you had to jump through. iTunes made it easier in late 2005 or mid 2005 with iTunes support for podcasting, but still you had to sync your device. And people still do that, but that's a pain.
Right.
Now, you want to listen to a podcast, want to listen to your show, or you want to listen to my show, you open up your smartphone app and you tap on it and you tap play. And that's it. It's so easy. It's as easy as playing Angry Birds. That's what I say. That's where podcasting has gotten to.
I love it. I do. I know. It's so amazing. And it's so funny because I talk to so many people that are into audio and they're so excited about podcasting now because especially in the online community for businesses taking their message out there, it's a great medium to connect with people because some people, like for me, I don't like to read blog posts. I was just having a conversation with my client the other day. She's like, me either. I love to listen though. So it's a great way to take that mobile content with them on the go. So speaking of apps, what are your favorite apps to use for your podcasts that you like to listen to?
Well, I like going to the individual podcasters app. So when I'm listening to Mark Maron or macOS Ken or Dave's Lounge, these are some of the ones that I listen to on a regular basis. I go right to their apps. Adam Carolla, I go to his app. So these are ones where I'll go right to their app and I'll just listen from their app. Now, if I'm looking at actually more podcasts that don't have their own apps, I actually use Apple's Podcasts app or I use Stitcher Radio. Yep. So those are the two. So Stitcher and Apple's Podcasts app are the ones I like. Outside of the individual podcasts, Apple's app has gotten better. It could be much better. It still has a way to go. But, I was actually looking at which ones are popular. If you want to know from Libsyn side, which ones are people actually using.
Yeah.
Pocket Casts from Shifty Jelly is the #1 aggregator we see of podcast apps. Instacast was #2, Podkicker, iCatcher, RS Radio, Podtrapper, TuneIn Radio, Pocket Tunes, and Downcast and BeyondPod in that order.
Wow.
That's how we see it across our network of shows. And again, this was based on over 130 million downloads we looked at for just last month.
Wow.
So that's last month's numbers. And iOS versus Android, 4.4 to 1 ratio of podcast downloads on iOS versus Android.
So talk to us about the Android market then. What are your vision with what's going on over there?
It's getting better. I guess the ratio used to be over 5 to 1, so it's lowering. So we're seeing more Android pickup. Pocket Casts from Shifty Jelly was the biggest of the podcatchers on the Android side, and as I mentioned, it was the biggest one overall because they also have an iOS version. But their Android side, because they are the bigger guy on the Android and they seem to be the go-to one on the Android side, they're doing quite well. I think because there's really nothing on the Android side to make it easy natively. Google killed Google Listen. So if you're on the Android side, the reason, I always say to people, why is it a big difference? I go, well, Apple has always embraced podcasting. Google has not. Google's kind of been a very towards podcasting, whereas Apple considers it a key part of the ecosystem.
Right. That's interesting. Do you have any insight on that from Google? Yeah.
Google just doesn't know how to monetize it, and Apple doesn't look at monetizing the users. Apple looks at making the user experience better, whereas Google looks at how do I monetize the user experience. So I think they look at you differently. Apple looks at the user as, an ongoing, that you're going to make money from the ecosystem. You're going to buy something. So that's how Apple makes some money. Whereas Google looks at you as they want to sell you to somebody.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting.
All the Google Android fanboys right now are sending emails to rob@libsyn.com saying, that's not true. But yes, it is. So please, if you don't agree with that, you can go ahead and email me, rob@libsyn.com. And those are more of my opinions than Libsyn's. But I mean, again, it's no secret. Apple has really embraced podcasting. Google has not, and that's just a fact.
Right. So with that being said, then, because the iTunes app does work on the Android phones, but the question is, do you foresee any shift in Google being able to bring that into the fold? Because what I love about iTunes is the reason why they want to promote podcasts and that they're free and that they like that is because it brings them into their network and the whole iTunes platform. So I definitely see that. But do you see any other shift there that could possibly be happening?
Yeah, again, on the Android side, I really think it's really up to individual producers to get their own apps. I mean, I highly recommend that if you're an individual producer, you get your own app. You get your own standalone app on the Google Android side so that you're not beholden to having to be found inside Pocket Casts. And besides that, having your own app in the different app stores that's standalone that means people will discover your content when they're searching on the content matter, not even thinking about podcasts, because not everybody still knows what a podcast is.
Right.
I mean, most people do, but not everyone. So if someone goes into an app store and they're searching for entrepreneurship and you do a podcast on entrepreneurship, if you have an app on that and they find your app, they don't care that that your show is a podcast. They just care, hey, I was interested in finding something on entrepreneurship and I found this app, and sure, it's audio content, but great. They don't care it's a podcast. They just care that they have content they can consume.
Exactly. So talk more about that, because that's what I love about Libsyn is you guys have that feature for different podcasters at different levels where they can actually have their own app.
Right. So with Libsyn, we've got two different ways to go around about doing it. One is you can have a standalone app, iOS, Android, eventually Windows Phone 8, that is free to the end users, and we put it in your own developer account. So you have to get your own developer accounts. We charge you a one-time fee to set it up, and then an ongoing little monthly fee for that. That's one way, and that gets it in there, and it's free to the end users. It's 100% branded to you. On the other side, we also have it where you can sell the app. So like I have a show called Today in iPhone, or actually now it's Today in iOS. And if you search for TII in the App Store, you'll find my app, and I charge people, and I get 100+ people buy that app every month. So it's a nice little revenue stream for me. So I actually make money from the app, and I give them push notifications and some other stuff. But so on one side, we have the iOS side and Android side where you can sell them. And then it's an iOS in our podcast box, and then Android it's standalone in the Amazon App Store. We do a rev share split with you, and there's no upfront fees, and you just have to have a $20 account or more with Libsyn to do that. And on the other side, we make it free to the end users. And again, if you're about growing your audience, that's the way I recommend people go if they're looking just to grow their audience, not so much monetize it.
That's fantastic. So I've looked at some of the apps that you guys have with Rogan and some of the other guys. They're amazing what they've put into it. So I'd love to get your feedback and your understanding of the stats from Libsyn's knowledge base there of what people, brand new entrepreneurs getting set up with a podcast and creating an app, what do they need to get started to help them grow their following? Because that's one of the big questions a lot of people ask is how do I grow that following and bring them into my tribe from listening to my podcast?
Well, one thing I would say to people, one thing is why should they do a podcast? And that's one of the things I like to talk about first is why should you do a podcast versus a blog? One, if you want to stand out from your peers, for every podcast out there, there's over 900 blogs. So it's a 905. I think it's 905 to 1 ratio of blogs to podcasts. If you're a female, the ratio goes 3,500 to 1. Female bloggers to podcasters.
Wow.
So if you want to stand out as a woman, podcast. Especially if you're a blogger. If you're a female blogger, podcast. You're now 1 in 3,600. So if you're covering a certain topic, now you kind of really stand out, and it gets you to be discovered in iTunes. The reality is, how many blogs are in iTunes? None. But there's 500 million people that use iTunes. Getting a podcast in there gets you discovered. So that's a key reason. So getting into iTunes, first and foremost, is the most important thing as a podcaster. You have to be in iTunes. If you're not in iTunes, you're not a podcaster. That's a snobbish way of looking at it. But that's a definition. If you're not in iTunes, you're not a podcaster.
Yeah.
You can say you're a podcaster, whatever, but you're not really if you're not in there, because that's the number one place that people discover. I mentioned the numbers from last month. 46, so almost 47% were computer downloads. 49% of those computer downloads were to 49.83 were to iTunes. So basically half of the downloads to computers are through iTunes. And then when you look on the other side, a lot of the downloads on the mobile side were to iOS devices, and so again through the whole Apple ecosystem. And not only that, I mentioned all those pod-catching apps, Pocket Cast from Shifty Jelly and the other guys. They have their directories in those apps. It's from the iTunes directory. So they pull the iTunes directory into those apps. So all those major apps are also the iTunes directory. So not only do you need to be in it for iTunes, you need to be in it for those other podcast apps. So
that's brilliant.
The 4 places you need to submit to grow your audience once you start: iTunes number 1, Zune, number 2. You send an email to, I think it's podcast@microsoft.com. I can confirm that with you later.
Perfect.
You want to also be in the BlackBerry podcast directory, and you want to be in Stitcher. Those are the top 4 places you want to be. Because Stitcher, by the way, gets more downloads than any of the aggregators that we had on our network. And Stitcher is only pulling directly from a few of our bigger shows. So Stitcher, so Stitcher, who is pulling from a few of our big shows, was able to get more downloads last month than any of the podcast apps that are aggregating 13,000 of our shows. So that just shows you Stitcher has some good pull.
And that's interesting. I find a lot of people are more vocal from Stitcher as well as listeners. Do you find that, or do you hear anything about that?
I find a lot of people that, say, hey, I discovered your show on Stitcher. So, I mean, and I say, where else are you going to find people that are discovering you outside of iTunes? I mean, so you really need to be, as a podcaster, submitting to Stitcher after you get into iTunes and Zune. So those 4 places, iTunes, Zune, BlackBerry, and Stitcher, those are the key.
Perfect. Thank you for sharing that. And also, can you touch on what Stitcher has done with GM now going forward, and how that's a big, big door opener for people to start podcasting as well? One of the key things about Stitcher isn't even so much now, it's the future. And that is they have done deals with car manufacturers to be on the new digital entertainment systems on the cars. So Stitcher is an app in a lot of the new cars that are coming out or will be coming out. So 5 years from now, most people looking at cars, when they go through the digital entertainment system, there's going to be a Stitcher app right there. So Stitcher is kind of becoming the radio station on these cars. So they've done a really great job on partnering up with auto manufacturers, not just GM, but a few others as well. I love it. It's so exciting. It's so exciting, especially for all of us that I used to commute 2.5 hours a day in Chicago. So I wish I had had that technology back then. But that's going to be really exciting. So speaking of that, though, for the people that are new to podcasting, that may be wanting to get into podcasts, I get this question a lot, and I'd love to get your perspective on it. I always feel any person, just like what you talked about, the odds for women and for men, and just being a podcaster to begin with, separate yourself and have you discovered. But are there better niches for people to be in as a podcaster?
The hardest one to be in to start out right now is going to be comedy, because there's so many in the comedy field. So, but really, any niche is a good niche to be in as a podcaster. The ones that I think you're going to do better on are ones where it's business oriented. You're going to have a good opportunity because business people have more opportunity in the day to listen than they do to read. I mean, if you're working at work, you really can't be reading blogs when you're supposed to be getting work done, but you can have your earbuds going. When you're commuting and you're driving to and from work, you can be listening. When you're working out, you can be listening. Doing yard work, you can be listening. So there's a really good opportunity there, and business ones do well. We do still see a lot of downloads during the week, so that's telling us, our download numbers increase during work hours, U.S. time. So that tells us that people are listening at work. So if you have a podcast that's business oriented, people are listening at work. I think it's a good mix. Now that said, the number one podcasts that get downloaded is still comedy.
Right.
Education comes in after that, and I think that comes back to just how many people have gone to school. It's everybody. So everyone wants to learn. Learning is just part of the process, and a lot of those are language podcasts. Or Grammar Girl is a big one. So people are trying to just better themselves. Yeah,
I love it. That's great. So now with the statistics that you have, you brought up a good point there when you were talking about and I just lost my train of thought here. Hold on. With the education and with the comedy, but I know what I wanted to ask you. For the statistics, for what about audio versus video podcasts and the future trends with that?
I always say it this way. Video, YouTube's one. So I mean what it is I had an argument with someone the other day, and they're trying to say, no, it hasn't. I'm like, yeah, it has. YouTube won video.
Right.
It's over. That said, there are a lot of places at work, a lot of companies where they block YouTube. Even the military blocks YouTube. So you still want to have, if you're on YouTube as a video, you still want to have it available as a podcast. You just don't want to make HD video. But if you go into iTunes and you actually look at what's popular, it's audio.
Right.
Audio is the top. There was one screenshot I took using a presentation where it just happened to be on the specific day when iTunes was showing the top podcast episodes for that day. The first 58 out of 60 were all audio.
Mm-hmm.
And then you only got to video on 59 and 60. And those 59 and 60 were like from CNBC or something like that, or NBC. So it was major television ones that were on there. But audio is still predominantly where you see most of the downloads on the podcast side. That said, it's still nice to have video. But if you're going to do a podcast on business, I highly recommend you just do audio. Unless there's some real value add to do video, and you have to say, what is that value add? If it's just two people talking, and I don't know where the value add. You're chewing up a lot of people's bandwidth. They have to get it on their smartphone. Now they have to make sure they download it when they're on Wi-Fi rather than cellular, because a lot of them are, they don't want to chew up their entire monthly quota on a couple of video podcasts.
Right.
In some countries, they have to. A lot of countries, you pay for the bandwidth. Just it's metered.
Right.
And it doesn't. They don't have any quota. So every bit that they download, they can choose to download your video podcast that's running, if it's HD, 30 megabits per minute, versus an audio podcast which is half a megabit per minute. So you'll get 60 times the cost for them to download the audio, the video versus the audio.
Right. Really good point. So for a serious podcaster that because I talk with a lot of podcasters that have audio programs that now are bringing on video, but they're still doing like kind of the talking heads situation. What would you say would be the best value add for people that really do want to do video though, and the length of their videos?
If you want to do the videos, ones that I do see that do well and usually are shorter. Mm-hmm. Which is the video ones that do well are less than 10 minutes, and the audio podcasts that do the best are like over an hour. So there's
wow. Mm-hmm.
So you look Joe Rogan, 3-hour long podcasts.
Now, do you think that's just because it's Joe?
He'll tell you. I think he had a good quote. Was one of his episodes last week. I think it was. He was talking about that. When he first started out, people, this is crazy. How can you go so long? He goes, but when he does an interview with someone for 3 hours, and he doesn't have to say, hey, we're going to take a break now and go to commercial, and he can just sit there and get intimate with the guest. I think he used the interview with David Lee Roth. He goes, 3 hours, David Lee Roth was more intimate than any interview you've ever heard him with anywhere else.
Right.
So I thought Joe made a really good point on that. Now, I think 3 hours is really long. But he can do it. Not everybody can, and I'm definitely not recommending a 3-hour podcast. But an hour long, Adam Carolla does an hour every day plus. And, Leo Laporte does an hour a week. My show is that I do today in iOS is an hour long. The people have time for that. And I think the spoken medium, a lot of times there's a reason to be that long. I don't think if you try to do it too short, you're trying to push too much in. Now, I also always warn people, don't do an hour because you say you have to do an hour. Right. If you only have 30 minutes of content, do 30 minutes. You don't want to try to take 15 minutes of content and spread it out over 2 hours. You want people at the end of the episode going, it's over, not, oh, it's over.
Right. They already tuned out. Right, exactly. Oh, I love that. And I love that you said that because I like to listen to at least an hour because I like to listen to the people that can really dive in deep for those interviews. But I was curious if other people were like that as well, because Edison, their recent study, they said that the average podcast listener listens for about 18 to 22 minutes. So what's kind of your take on that for how long they listen, but people can always pick it back up later?
I wonder if that has to do with the fact that the average commute in the U.S. is about 22 minutes.
Exactly.
You got to take the Edison research from a certain perspective. People are probably saying, how long do they listen? They probably say, well, I drive to work. It takes me 20 minutes to drive to work. So they're probably saying, 20 minutes.
Yeah.
I just think you have to look at that. And the beauty of it is, even if someone's driving to work 20 minutes and your show's an hour long, they listen to 20 minutes on the way in, 20 minutes on the way back, and 20 minutes on the next day.
Yep.
It stops when they want it to stop, and it starts when they want it to start. It's not like radio where, if they go in, if you have an hour-long show and they listen to the first 20 minutes and they get to work, they miss the next 40. It's there for them later when they want it.
Yep, I love with the new apps now too, where it just picks up right where you left off, whatever show you're on, whatever podcast you're at. So it's brilliant. I love that. So you've talked a lot with a lot of big name celebrities are in iTunes, but I've noticed. So I live here in Denver now, and one of the main radio stations here, The Mix, I think it's 101.1. I can't remember for sure what the exact dial code is, but they always promote to go to the podcast. Like they don't even promote, Rob, anymore to listen live. It's like go to the podcast. So what do you see for the news arena and anybody else in that journalism mode?
Well, I look at, we have a lot of podcasts that host with us that do live shows. Mm-hmm. So they'll do the live show, but then they'll do the podcast.
Right.
And when you talk to these people and you find out, how many people are listening when it's live versus how many are listening later, it's a 200-to-1 ratio, listening later versus listening live. Mm-hmm. And the reality is that one person that's listening live, or all the people that are listening live, 100% of them will listen to it later. So even though they still have those people that are listening live, they would all listen to it if it was only later.
Yeah.
But the people that aren't listening to it live, you're not going to get them to listen to it live. Because they can't work it into their schedule or whatnot. So I think what you're hearing and seeing from a lot of these radio stations, they're starting to realize that, hey, not everybody has time to listen in the morning when we're doing this or in the afternoon, but they do have time throughout the week to listen. Mm-hmm. And that's when they're going to pick up their biggest numbers. So they're probably finding out what a lot of the podcasters have found out is, sure, I'll do a live show, I'll get some interaction. And that's the reason I tell people, if you're going to do a live show, do it for interaction. Do not do a live show because you think it's going to pick you up an audience.
Right.
It won't. It will not. Matter of fact, I'll tell people, if your main reason for doing a live show is because you think it's going to grow your audience that's going to be there live, you're actually hurting your audience because you're not going to be as good live as you can be if you edit.
I love it. I love that. And I have a client actually that just last year she was doing a live show, was getting no following. She has such a great topic matter. She started podcasting and I taught her a couple things. And within 4 months, she had over 17,000 hits to her website in 1 month, doubled her email opt-in and her exposure to her website just from her podcast. And she had never had success like that before in any of the other mediums. So I love that you share that because it's so powerful that I don't think a lot of people understand the benefits of it with that.
Yeah, I mean, if you listen to Today in iOS, you're going to hear a very clean, flowing show from me because I edit like crazy. I do a couple hundred edits per episode, and I make sure it's clean, and any mistakes I flub up, I correct them. Because I'm not good live. People are listening here now. No. I mean, it's just, I feel better when I can edit out things that my train of thought went off in the wrong direction, and let's get it back on the tracks, and we'll delete that.
Yep.
And I think that's something that you as a podcaster need to realize is you have the ability to edit and make yourself sound better. So why not do that? I don't understand why, and I, like your client, I've seen a lot of other people like that, where they'll do these live shows and they're rambling. And if they would just take some time to cut it down and edit it, they would sound so much better. But they think that they're going to get an audience live, and they're not. I mean, even Leo Laporte will tell you when he listens, he's at like 200 or 100-to-1 ratio of those that are live versus those that listen on later.
That's a really good point, though. But I think even some podcasters, too, I think that can really help podcasters have a solid show as well. And I'd love for you to talk on that because the big question I get is, should I do a solo show or should I do an interview-based show? And so many more people are doing interview-based shows because it's the fastest way to grow your audience. It's great content. But a lot of people still want to have their solo side where they can become the expert, have more exposure for their brand. So I'd love to get your feedback on how people can structure a show that's engaging, that doesn't have that rambling, that gets to the point. How can people do that better?
Yeah, I mean, I've done it both ways. So my first show, Podcast 411, was about interviewing other podcasters. And I spent a lot of time editing the interviews, but I spend a lot more time on Today in iOS doing research. I put 20 hours a week into the show.
Wow.
And I do that to make it the best show out there on the iPhone. I mean, it was the first and it's the biggest, and I put a lot of time and effort into it. So if you're going to do your solo show, prepare to do some work. I mean, be ready to do work. If your goal is just to hit record, stop, post, do no research ahead of time, and just put up your rambling thoughts, your audience size is going to be pretty small. That's I know a lot of podcasters that do that. They have a very small audience. If they're happy with that, that's great. But if your goal is to grow your audience, you need to put a little work into it. And there's a reason why there's a 900-to-1 ratio of blogs to podcasts. It's more work to do a podcast.
Well, you know, that's funny you say that, though, because I think it's easier. I really do. But I like to speak. So for me, writing is a very monotonous chore for me. So when I found out about podcasting, it was like the light bulb went off. I'm like, oh, this is awesome. So that's interesting with that perspective that you have.
Now, on the other side, you asked about doing the interview, and the reason to do an interview show or a couple people show is those are actually less work because you have interaction and a dialogue and a spontaneity. Now, you can edit, and I do recommend you edit. And people say, well, I just want to do an interview with someone and put it up raw. That's great. You can interview somebody, and here's how I always equate that. You put a mic in front of someone and say, hey, we're going to talk now, and 20,000 people are going to hear exactly how you sound. And I'm not going to edit. Start talking. The person is going to be a little bit nervous and unease. But if you bring that person on your show and you say to them, hey, I edit this show. Don't worry. If you mess up, we'll edit it out. If you feel like you didn't say something right, just go ahead and start over and we'll correct it. And don't forget to tell me before the end of the episode to change anything, and we'll make sure we get those edits in there. That person now is going to be much more at ease as your guest.
Right.
I mean, you know, these shows that are out there, a lot of these interview shows that are really good, they have editing in there. You might not realize it, but they're doing some editing. So I do recommend editing. I think it's your friend as a podcaster. I think it will make the guest sound better. And here's the beauty. If someone is nervous, they're going to be, And some people just talk that way. I know I'm saying some ums and knows here myself after doing this 8 years. If you edit out some of that stuff and you make them sound better, they're more likely to promote the fact they were on your show if they think they sound good than if they thought, oh my God, I can't believe I just went on that show. I sounded like an idiot. If they think they sound like an idiot, what's the chances they're going to tweet they were on your show? Or they're going to put it in their Facebook, or put it on LinkedIn. They're not. But if they think they sounded like brilliant, better than they have ever sounded. I used to joke with my wife, I'm so good at editing, I could make President Bush sound good. I got that good at it. If you can make someone sound better than they've ever sounded, not only will they tweet about it and put it on LinkedIn, they'll put a link to it on the front page of their blog. It'll be there forever. So it behooves you to make your guests sound good.
Oh, hands down, absolutely. I've had guests that have used it in their products from interviews we've done. So that's awesome. That's a great testament to that. So can you share some tips about some of because you're a true pro in this area. So what are some of the software that you use?
I'm pretty old school on the software. When I'm actually doing Skype interviews, I record off my computer onto a digital recorder. So I take the audio out into a mixer and bring everything on a digital recorder, and then when I'm done, I bring it into GarageBand and I edit. So I do my editing in GarageBand. When I'm doing my Today in iOS podcast, I record right into GarageBand and edit as I go. Perfect. So GarageBand's the main program I'll use. If I have to correct audio because there's a mistake, I use Levelator, where the audio levels aren't right, I use Levelator, and I use a plugin in GarageBand called SoundSoap 2, which unfortunately you can't get anymore, which cleans up the background noise. So those are the main pieces of software I use. I export from GarageBand into iTunes, add my ID3 tags, and I upload to Libsyn. And and that's what I've been doing for 8 years.
It's really simple. I know there's a lot of work in the editing. Don't get me wrong, I do realize that. But for the reason I say this is because a lot of people, I think, have a fear of podcasting because they think it is so technical. But once they learn the skill sets, it really is not as difficult, I think, as people like to have that idea there.
It's just a lot of steps. They're not hard. It's just a lot of steps, and learning them to start with can be, to the untechnical, can be intimidating. But It doesn't have to be. Today you can actually do podcasting from an iPad. You do it 100% from the iPad. I did a presentation at New Media Expo, which was use an app called Boss Jock. So that's the other program I do use. I'll use that for recording some stuff when I don't want any fan noises and I have to do some professional recording. I'll use the BossJock app. I'll record on the iPad, and then I'll move that over to the computer. But the app of BossJock, you can actually record on it and export out of the BossJock app as an MP3 file right into your Libsyn account. So let's say you can use this on the iPhone too. You're at a trade show and you want to interview someone. You can use the iRig iMic MicCast from IK Multimedia. It's like $40 for the mic. I did an interview at CES. I interviewed the person back and forth. When you're done with that, you can encode it and upload it as MP3 right to your QuickCast folder in Libsyn, and it goes onto your feed, and you don't even have to log in. So right from the floor, you can do the interview and have it uploaded, and it be in your feed and be done. I actually did a recording on stage at New Media Expo in my presentation and had it go live on my feed while I'm doing the presentation on how to do a podcast. It's that easy.
That's brilliant. Now, I have a question for you on that, because this is a question I do get a lot too, where people want to just throw up their audio that way, but they don't have the imaging or any music or anything to have that professional quality. What are your thoughts on that for keeping listeners and also growing the listener base of who their brand is?
Well, as far as you should get some sounds. I mean, have a little bit of music in the intro and the outro. That makes it sound a little bit more professional. It's like, okay, if nothing else, it lets people know when they're listening to back-to-back episodes, when they're coming into an episode, when they're coming out of it. Have the intro and the outro music a little different. First thing I always say to people, the first thing they should hear in the episode when they listen to it is you should give them the show name and an episode number. And people are like, why should you put that up front? Because a lot of people are flipping through and they're moving from episode to episode, and they want to know, is that something they listen to or not, without having to look down. And a lot of podcast listeners are blind. And just having what the episode number is at the beginning and the name, the very first thing they hear, keeps them from having to listen to 45, 50 seconds of an episode to figure out if they've got the right one or not. I think that gives a little bit more professional feel to it when you do that. But then in the middle of it, don't go crazy with the zingers and the sound effects. And I mean, I've heard some that are really crazy. People going overboard with the finding all these new little sound effects, going to like freesound.com or freesound.org, I think it is. There's a site out there where you can get all these sound effects for free. But go to ccmixter.org is a great site, ccmixter, mixter.org. And it's a great place to get some bed music that's free, and you put that in for your intro and your outro. Or if you have GarageBand, there's free music in there. And unfortunately, some people overuse the same free music that's in it. If you listen to a lot of podcasts like I do, you're like, oh, yep, that's someone did it on GarageBand. Yep, that's another one on GarageBand. I know that sound.
Oh, exactly. Well, I love it. That's awesome. Thank you for connecting on that. But what I'd love to go into now is the biggest question of what people always ask. We had some people on Twitter asking this too, is how to market and how to monetize their podcast. Okay.
Marketing and okay, so those are two different things. This is the fame and the fortune side of it. So that's what I would say. People either want fame or fortune. Matter of fact, if you give them a choice between fame and fortune, they almost always choose the fame over the fortune, which is ironic, unless they already have a really big show. And then they're just looking on the monetization. But on the marketing side, big things, as we talked about earlier, is get into the different directories. That's key step number one. Number two is every time you have a Twitter account, every time you new episode, you got to mention that it's in there. On your feed, on your Facebook account, you got to do it there. You have to have your podcast brand go out to all the different places, and you got to not stop promoting it. A lot of people will get really excited about promoting their show early on, and then they stop promoting it. That's a mistake, and that's why a lot of shows plateau. If your show's plateauing, ask yourself, what did I used to do to promote the show that I'm not doing today? And you'll go, oh, wow, I used to do all that. Go back and look at what you did, and keep promoting it. Interviewing people is a great way to promote your show. Finding people that are the biggest names in blogging in your niche and getting them on your show is a great way to grow your audience, because some of them, again, if you edit them well, are going to promote you on their blog because they don't see you as competition. They look at, oh, it's a podcast, that's fine, and you get them on there. Getting big name guests is also a great way to grow your audience. So finding celebrities that will appeal to your audience And people go, well, how do you find a celebrity? Two things you can do to get a celebrity. One, find out which ones are promoting a book or a movie. They're the most willing to come on. And two, exaggerate about your numbers a little bit.
Said directly from Rob.
Nobody, everybody lies about their numbers. I mean, the reality is everyone lies about their numbers. But if you want to get a guest that first time and you talk to their PR person, they're not more than likely they're not going to ask you to show your server logs.
Right.
Inflate your numbers somehow, but getting that first celebrity on, you can then use that celebrity that's been on your show to get other celebrities. Because once you get one on, then you can when I first got I can't remember, Senator Edwards was the first celebrity I got on. Mm-hmm. And after I got him on, getting anyone else, I used him as an example. And then I got Ronald Moore on, and then I had all these nice celebrities that I could then use for other people. And then so getting that, but go and go to IMDb Pro and sign up for IMDb Pro, because then you get the contacts for all those celebrities and see who's out promoting. If you see them on the late night circuit, they're in promotion mode.
Brilliant. I love it. Yeah, that's incredible. So can you repeat that resource for everybody again? Oh,
IMDb Pro. It's like $15 a month or something like that. And sign up for a month and cancel. But go through and get all the contacts for anyone you think you'd ever want on your show. Get all the contacts for all their PR people. And then cancel after 1 month. Sign up a year later and do it again. But yeah, that's a great way to get some celebs. Now, again, bloggers, key bloggers and celebrities, those are a great way for you to grow your audience. Next, as I mentioned earlier, having a standalone smartphone app, being out in the different app directories, having the right name for your podcast in iTunes is the most important one. I mean, this is the one that people don't realize is iTunes search sucks. It really search is horrible. It doesn't matter what you put in for your keywords. What matters is what's in the title of your show, and then it's sorted by how many subscribers you've had all times. Worst thing you can do is use an ITPC link. You don't want that. You want people to have a link right to your iTunes store page, so they subscribe in iTunes. Getting people to subscribe to you in iTunes is important too. So don't miss out on those. So, I mean, those are some of the key things on the marketing side that will help you grow your show. And then the last one, interact with your audience. Have a call-in number and a Gmail account that they can send in voicemail messages. Get them as part of your show and get them to promote your show. Go to k7.net and get a phone number that people can call into your show. So the letter K, the number 7.net. Get a number. Like on my show, it's 206 Moondog. And so if you call it 206 Moondog, that'll get you to Today in iOS. I think Podcast 411, the number is 206 Mom Help. Those are my numbers. So, just getting the audience into your show as part of the content, even if you just put them at the end, if they hear themselves on your show, they are more likely to then promote your show.
Exactly. Oh, those are brilliant. All of these resources will be in the show notes, everybody. So I'll make sure that I get detailed on all of this. But Rob, these are great. This is fantastic. I love the call-in number. Use Twitter. That works really, really well as well to get people interacting, or Facebook, whatever medium that you're used to. But that's brilliant. So are there any other tips that you can help for new podcasters that don't have big followings yet of how to start a world-class podcast with their title, or any other tips that you could have for them?
On the title, I always say, what are 2 or 3 keywords that you would use or pay for in Google AdSense? Get them in the title of your show. Because that's going to be most important. And you have to have really good-looking artwork. It has to be 1400 by 1400 pixel image, JPEG, RGB color. Don't do CMYK, because if you do CMYK, it won't show up in iTunes. If you go into iTunes and you see a podcast and it doesn't show an album artwork up there for that show, chances are they have the wrong artwork in their feed. So make sure it's a JPEG or a PNG file, 1400 by 1400, and it has to look really good, and it has to look good when it's shrunk down to 55 by 55. So make sure you get your artwork right. You will not get featured in the new and notable section if you have ugly artwork or no artwork. They just won't do it. There's 2 guys in iTunes that handle all the shows that get featured every week. That's it. That's the iTunes team, is 2 guys for the US. There's another person, and I think they have 4 people overall worldwide. But for the U.S., it's 2 guys.
Wow.
Well, it's naturally it's a guy and a girl. This person just took over. Brian was the person previously on the iTunes team. He just left to another part. Oh. But so just make sure you have good looking artwork and a good title for your show. That's important. And then it's just go out and try to get some guests. Even if your show is not going to be an interview show, get some interview segments early on. Reach out to some of the bloggers early on that are in your niche. You can go back to the format you want later on, bring on some guests, reach out to other podcasts that are in your same niche that are already out there, contribute on their shows. I mean, I always say people, any podcasters can contribute to my show and promote their podcast. I'm always open for other podcasters to call in with comments and questions and promote who they are. So most podcasters will be the same way. They'll be very receptive to mentioning your show if you contribute content to their show.
Exactly. I love the podcast community. I really do. It's just an amazing community of people that are all about giving and sharing and collaborating. That's what's so brilliant about this arena. So I just love it.
Oh yeah. The other thing to do is don't be a big rookie mistake. Don't call it a netcast or an oggcast or something else cast. It's a podcast.
Right.
It's I always am amused when people are still fighting this fight. It's like, really? And it's usually new people that come into the community. Well, I don't like the name. My mom didn't know what it was. Really? That's nice. Because, well, you know what? Who knows the name? Apple, Microsoft, Google, Yahoo, BlackBerry, Nokia, ESPN, CNN, NPR. They know the name podcast. Don't worry about what your mom knows.
No, that's a great point, though. It really is. I mean, and they're all in there. All those top broadcast channels, everybody is in iTunes with a podcast. So it's I love it. So what I know we're coming to the end
monetization,
here.
right?
Yes.
Okay, so how do you make money? Here's the biggest mistake people make. They only want to make money one way. If the only way you want to make money is advertising, say that's how I'm going to make money, it's just going to be advertising. You need to get like 5,000 downloads per episode if you really want to monetize your show. At least 5,000 per episode. Most shows don't get to that. Now you're looking, the top 10% of the shows get to that number. So if that's the only way you're thinking of making money, you need to open up your thought process a little bit. Another great way to make money is premium. And getting people to sign up to do extra, where you do some extra content that only the premium subscribers get. So kind of a freemium model. Some episodes free, some episodes premium. That, especially if you're in a niche, is where you're going to make more money than advertising. So the premium model, freemium model, look at CPM advertising. If you're going to do advertising, also look at CPA, which is cost per acquisition. So CPM is cost per 1,000 downloads. So you get paid for every 1,000 downloads, regardless of how it does. Again, there you need to be at least 5,000. Then there's CPA, which is, you mentioned a link like netflix.com/your show name, and you get paid for people that go and sign up for Netflix. Things like that. You'll hear like 1-800-Flowers, and those are other affiliate ones that are out there. And people will do Amazon links and Amazon affiliate programs. So there's a lot of things, but you need to look at multiple ways to monetize, not just one way. I think premium's a really great way to do it. We've seen some really good success with shows like Mark Maron does really, really well on the premium side. He makes X number of episodes available for free all the time, and anything older than that is premium, and then every now and then he releases a premium-only episode. Ben Greenfield's going down the premium route. So
great.
So he's going to have some premium stuff too. I think he's going to do some extra video content that's going to be premium only.
Oh, cool.
So Ben's doing that. And other people, Aisha Tyler's doing it. Adam Carolla has a premium. So again, Adam's doing advertising, but he's also doing the premium. Mark Maron's doing the advertising, he's also doing the premium. These guys get it. They know what they're doing. I think, I hear people, I don't want to do that. No, rethink it if you're really into making money from the podcast. Now, some people make money from podcasts from completely different ways. They have a book, and they're promoting the book, and they're looking at that's how they're going to do it. I think like the Rich from the Rich Roll podcast. He's out there promoting his book. So how you do it really depends on what you're trying to monetize. If you have a book, then maybe you want to hold off on the advertising until at least your book promotions are done. Maybe you want to hold off on the freemium model until that. But it doesn't hurt to start thinking about that. Even if you are promoting the book, leaving your last 10 episodes free doesn't really hurt you on your audience size.
Exactly. I love that because that's what I teach. I like to teach. I don't really teach much on the advertising as much because of what you talked about with the episodes and people getting started. But if you're a speaker, you can book speaking gigs. I've gotten so many joint venture partnerships, telesummit, webinar platforms. If you're in that mode, or if not, like with Rob with the book. I mean, there's so many ways to monetize. So I love that you shared those perspectives of it because there really is. It's not just one way. You can set your show up to be what you want it to be for your business and to help you get to the next level, whatever that looks like for your business. So I think it's brilliant. So do you have any other tips that you'd like to share for maybe veteran podcasters?
I think the biggest thing is don't go overboard on the equipment. If you're spending thousands of dollars on equipment, you're spending too much money. Mm-hmm. I mean, a good mic costs you $100. The Yeti mic from B&H Photo is $100, and that is a great mic. You don't need to be spending $1,000 on a mic and all this other stuff. I mean, I spent a lot of money on equipment, and the reality is, after it's all said and done, these podcasts are getting encoded down to 64 kilobits per second. It's and they're listening through earbuds on as they're driving in their car. I mean, really, did it really matter that your mid-range was off just a tweak? So don't become an audiophile. Don't concentrate on the wrong stuff. It's about the content. At the end of the day, no one's ever going to say to you, hey, Kris, I stuck with your show because the audio quality was so good, I just knew eventually the content would come around.
Oh, you could have said that better. So true. I love that. I think so many people get caught up in that, though. They feel like they have to have every single gadget and it has to be perfect. And I mean, I started with a Logitech headset and launched my show and was doing big interviews with just a Logitech headset. So I love that you talk about that because I think a lot of people get overwhelmed with it and it takes them out of the game.
I have a Marantz PMD 660, which I spent $500-something on. 2 Shure SM58 mics, which are another $200, cables, and the whole setup was, I don't know, $800 for that. And what do I take now with me to do mobile interviews? My iPhone and the $40 iRig MicCast mic. Brilliant. Because it's so much, the difference in the audio quality was so little.
Yeah.
And what I have to carry with me is so big a difference that when I'm traveling now, it's like, okay, do I carry this one thing that's the size of, the little card reader? Or do I carry 15 pounds of extra gear? Pretty easy decision, especially when you're traveling. So again, as long as the audio quality is good, it doesn't hurt their ears, the content's what matters. So just concentrate on that. Don't go overboard on the equipment. I've seen so many people do that, and just edit.
Well, thank you so much, Rob. This was such a blast. Thank you for the insight on everything. I'd love to have you back in the future as well as for more trends and tips in podcasting. But if you can just share with the listeners where everybody can go find out where your shows are at and more on Libsyn, that'd be fantastic.
Absolutely. For Libsyn, go to libsyn.com, libsyn.com. And you go there to sign up for podcasting. Go in right now, start up, and have your podcast going tonight. And for me, myself, my personal podcast, Today in iOS, is the one I'm doing on a regular basis. So go to todayinios.com, and I do all that, host it again through Libsyn. I have my apps. Everything I do is through Libsyn. So I eat the dog food, as they say. And, again, if you're going to podcast, I'll say, if you're not going to host with us, at least host with somebody that you're paying. Don't go down these free roads because a lot of times people go and they'll host on some free service, and free services go out of business so many times over the last so many years. And we'll get people like, oh my God, my podcast just went down, the service went down. Well, stay away from the free stuff. Host on a real reputable podcast. If it's not us, find someone that, at least that's been around for a while and that you're going to pay a little bit for. It's worth it in the end.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that point too, because that is so true. It happens all the time. And Libsyn has been around since the beginning. They're not going anywhere. They're just getting bigger, badder, stronger with everything they've got coming out. So thank you again, Rob. It was such a pleasure, and I look forward to connecting with you more in the future.
Kris, it was a pleasure talking with you, and thank you so much for having me on the show.
Absolutely. And I hope you enjoyed that episode. I'd love to get your feedback here for the Lifestylepreneur podcast right in iTunes. Simply leave us a 5-star and a review letting us know what you like, who you're interested in hearing more from, and what topics you really want help with in your business that I can bring on those key experts to really fine tune and help you in your business and creating the lifestyle of your dreams. And I'll be giving shout outs, so make sure you put your name and your website address if you want me to share that with the community as well. And again, thanks for listening. I'm so excited that you found the Lifestylepreneur podcast, and I can't wait to connect with you and learn more about your business as we continue to grow this community. So again, have a great day, and I'll talk to you next week. Thank you for tuning in to the Lifestylepreneur podcast. Again, I'm Kris Gilbertson, and I'm committed to bringing you top training from leading lifestylepreneurs all over the world to help you break through and turn your dreams into your ideal lifestyle. And make sure to join us at www.lifestyleacademy.com to receive VIP training from specific guests I interview on the show, so that you can really easily start to implement what you've learned from listening. I know we're all busy, and sometimes we don't have time to listen to the entire podcast or take notes, because I'm always listening on the go. So I like to call it the Lifestyle Cliff Notes to creating your ideal business and make it really simple for you. So those will be sent via the email list. Plus, I also want to connect with you personally, and being on the Lifestyle Academy mailing list is where all the magic happens. We'll host VIP trainings once a month that we can't always bring out on the podcast with even more detailed information. And I also want to connect with you personally. I want to know what's going on in your business and what you need help with, and who I can bring on to aid you in creating your ideal lifestyle. And so I'll be asking questions every once in a while that I want you to reply, and I reply back to you personally. So again, until next time, wishing you on your way to achieving all of your dreams. Talk to you soon.